Hi guys, this will be our Aristotle lecture. So if you go to the notes that are on modules and start looking at chapter 5 in our textbook, we'll start there on page 50. So first of all, Kaufman distinguishes between pleasure and happiness, which is something that Aristotle does as well. And if you look at my sample paper, you'll see that I explain the distinction between pleasure and happiness from both Aristotle and Kaufman. Excuse me. My voice is going to be a little funky throughout the lecture, so bear with me on that. So the first thing that I put in the notes is pleasures are episodic. They come and go. So as in my sample paper, I said that as I eat the cupcake, I feel the bodily pleasure. The sugar, whatnot, hit my taste buds, and it sends signals to my brain, and I've experienced pleasure. But after that's all done, after the cupcake is done, the pleasure is done. I don't feel the pleasure from the cupcake 5 hours later. And that's pretty standard. And the reason why people who eat when they're depressed or anxious or whatever, end up gaining weight is because one cupcake doesn't do it. They have to continue to eat to keep the pleasure happening. If one cupcake were enough and you could feel happy because you ate one cupcake, then you wouldn't need to eat any more. But that's not how it works. And people continue to do drugs, drink, eat unhealthy food or whatever, because generally unhealthy food is the stuff that gives us the most pleasure in that sense. Apples do not give me the kind of pleasure that pizza and even sushi tend to give me. So that's the stuff that we tend to indulge in, and we have to continue to do it. But happiness is not like that, it looks like. A human being can have experienced pleasures and deep suffering throughout his life, but nevertheless have had a very happy life. We don't seem to think that those things, having suffering and having a happy life, are mutually exclusive. In fact, we tend to seem to think that suffering is imperative for a happy life, and that a life that doesn't have a lot of pleasure, that isn't full of sex and cupcakes and sushi and booze and dancing and all the other things that we find pleasurable, are not necessary for a happy life. I would wager that our current Dalai Lama, who is probably a very happy man when you get down to it, is happier than I am. And I've had all of those things that I listed many times over, and he has not. He's made the choice not to. And I can guarantee you that he is much happier than I am. And I have the opportunity for luxuries and money and a car and so on and so forth. And it looks like, when we think deeply about it, the things that bring us the greatest happiness are things that don't necessarily bring us pleasure. Love, the love of another person seems to, if it's done properly, if it's real love, which engages forgiveness and giving and patience, that seems to bring us much greater happiness, although it won't always be pleasurable. So it looks like happiness and pleasure are not the same things. And this is certainly what Aristotle thinks. Now, my next point there, and you can see this at the bottom of page 50, the last paragraph. Most significantly, if pleasure is what we're seeking in life when we say we want to be happy, then a life of utterly mindless pleasure would be a happy one. Consider a person who plays cards all day or watches television. This person might have a life that is as pleasant as can be. We might even say he's happy, but only in the sense that it has been a life of ease, diversion, entertainment, a life of pleasure. Or imagine a brain-damaged person who takes great delight in the simplest things, a clean diaper, full stomach, colorful toys, etc., etc. So his point here is that no matter how pleasurable these people's lives may be, watching TV all day, so on, we wouldn't trade our lives for that, even though our lives mean that we will not feel pleasure all the time. That colorful toys or watching TV will not be enough to satisfy us, to keep us going, to inspire us, to give us a feeling of purpose and meaning in life. Even though this guy has that opportunity with something so small as colorful toys, it's nothing like the opportunity that we have. This is reminiscent, if you recall, of what Mill was trying to say in chapter 2 on utilitarianism. There's more than one kind of pleasure. Now, Aristotle doesn't make a distinction between pleasures. He just says there's pleasure and there's happiness, and they're not the same thing. What he calls happiness, Mill calls that higher pleasure, intellectual or moral pleasure. Aristotle just says, okay, if they're so different, the pleasure that I get from the cupcake or sex, it's completely different than the pleasure that I get from virtue, from being a virtuous person, or intellectual pursuits. They're so different. Let's just not even use the same word. Let's just say one is pleasure and the other one is something else. So this is the same basic point that Mill made when he said that it's better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. The idea, again, is that although the pig doesn't need that much to be satisfied, he has an easier life in the sense that he can just roll around in the mud and eat and have sex, and he's perfectly content, so long as we don't slaughter him and raise him inhumanely for food, which of course we probably would do. But the few pigs that don't have to be raised so inhumanely for our pleasure, mere bodily pleasure, for which we sacrifice not only the lives, I guess, but the well-being while they're alive of many other living creatures on the planet, even other humans. But the pig who doesn't have to live that way, who is treated humanely until he's slaughtered, which is perfectly fine, he is happy to roll around in the mud and to eat. I get to roll around in the mud and eat too, but that's not enough for me as a human being. And although I have to feel more and deeper suffering than the pig, it's still worth it because the happiness that I feel is deeper and greater than the pig's could ever be. So it's worth it still to be human, even though it means that we have to suffer quite a bit. And Aristotle agrees with this basic idea that pleasure and happiness are not the same thing. So you can go after money, which will maybe, I guess if you use it properly, purchase for you things that will afford you pleasure, and go for it your whole life. Go after money and pleasure. I guarantee you at the end of it, you will wish that you would listen to Aristotle. Aristotle's not the only one who says this. I mean, this is pretty standardly the human experience, that the end goal of our lives is not to have orgasms and cupcakes. It doesn't seem to be enough to make us truly happy. But so it goes. Now the next thing here, and he brings this up on page 51 in the first full paragraph, a richer understanding of happiness, etc., etc. So the Greek word here is eudaimonia, and it's generally translated happiness in the literature. So if you read, if you were going to read the original works of Plato and Aristotle, they would use the Greek term you would see is eudaimonia. But in English it's translated happiness, but given that we think of happiness as something that is like a mood, it's not a very good translation, and a lot of translators now are changing it to flourishing, which is much closer to what the Greeks had in mind when they used the word eudaimonia. We tend to think of happiness as, well, I'm in a good mood right now, so I'm happy. But in an hour, my friend was being mean, so now I'm angry or I'm sad, and therefore I'm no longer happy, because now I'm in a sad mood. But that will also pass back into a happy mood in another couple of hours, and so on and so forth. We tend to identify happiness with changing moods. I'm in a happy mood, or a sad or unhappy mood. This is not the idea that the Greeks are using, and honestly, it's not really the idea that we have today. Certainly we identify moods, but it might be closer to what even we feel to say I'm in a joyful or cheerful mood. When we think of happiness, the Greeks and us now, in the 21st century in the United States, we don't even seem to equate happiness with only a mood. We seem to think of a happy life as one that is not just full of happy moods. Because I can have a happy mood all the time if I just shoot heroin and take ecstasy all the time, right? But I do not think that that means I lived a happy life. And we don't tend to think that. So it seems like we have maintained something very important from the Greeks, that happiness is not equated with a happy mood. I can be in a bad mood often, but that doesn't mean that I'm not a happy person. I might just be going through a tough period in my life. So the better translation of eudaimonia is flourishing, not happiness. So whenever I use the word happiness in relation to Aristotle, understand that what I really mean is flourishing. So start to try to think of the word happiness differently in this context, okay? So look what I've said. So happiness is flourishing, the Greek word eudaimonia. And look at in there, so within the word eudaimonia, you see the word daemon. From that word, we have gotten the word demon, which we tend to think of as being an evil spirit. And you can thank Christianity for that association. But the original word daemon just means spirit. It's not evil. It's just a spirit. And so, I mean, there's an important reason why the idea of spirit is encompassed in flourishing. He who flourishes has life, has spiritedness, is alive in more than one way, biologically alive, certainly. And for Aristotle, the only things that can truly flourish are those which are biologically alive. So bacteria, plants, animals. And human beings are animals, by the way. So we all have a spirit, but we also have spiritedness. This, and we mean something different by that. This desire for life, this zest for life. So there's a difference between being alive and living. I could be alive, but be a walking zombie, as it were, because I'm so depressed or something. So I'm not truly living, even though I'm alive. My heart is beating and so forth. So consider that flourishing, this idea of happiness, flourishing, has something to do with being alive biologically, but also this notion of having a spirit, being spirited, having this zest, this desire, this push to achieve, specifically to achieve one's own greatness. Well, anyway, I'll say more. So the next point, to flourish is to actualize one's particular potential. And the Greek word here is, and I put it on there, arete. So arete refers to the particular virtue or greatness of a thing. There are two meanings of virtue, and they are related. We tend to, in this culture now, only maintain the one meaning, and it means moral goodness, that kind of virtue. So a virtuous man is a morally good man. Well, there's an older meaning of the term virtue, and the Greeks certainly maintained this meaning. And it means one's strength, one's particular strength. So if I say, what are the virtues of this particular plan? I don't mean what is the moral goodness of the plan. That's ridiculous. I mean, what are the strengths? What are the merits of this plan? What's good about the plan in terms of strategy? Not in terms of morality. That's silly. Because a plan is probably going to be amoral in that sense. So there are two kinds of virtue. They are related because they both mean strength in that sense, but one means amoral strength and one means moral strength. So what are the most strategic aspects of the plan? That has nothing to do with morality. Okay, it has more to do with efficiency or something. So, for the Greeks then, all living things in this sense had their own arete, their own virtue, their own greatness. And this is important. Make sure you understand this. You're a human. You're a particular human. You do not have your own arete that is different in any way from the arte of any other human, me and you, we have the same exact arte, because arte is based only on the kind of creature you are, not the individual that you are within the kind. So all humans have the same arte. All dogs have the same arte. All oak trees have the same arte. All willow trees have the same arte, and it is not the same as an oak tree's. Okay? But human beings are all of a kind, and we all have the same arte, certainly for the Greeks, but for Aristotle. So as I say, humans do not have individual potential. My potential is no different than yours. We have only human potential, just as all oak trees have the same oak tree potential. People get fussy about this because it's pretty clear that I have the potential. It's clear to me in my experience. I don't have the potential to be a great guitarist. I guess I've not really particularly tried, but I've tried musical instruments. I don't like them. I have no desire whatsoever to play a musical instrument. I was a singer throughout school, and I loved that, but I'm not interested in playing an instrument. My mother made me play the piano, and I hated it every moment, and I sucked at it, and I didn't want to do it, and bleh, it's no good. I have no potential to be a great musician, but I have the potential for other things that are particular to me, and I'm sure that a number of you have the potential to be great musicians, and you probably already are. And then some of us probably have the potential, not me, but some of you probably have the potential to be great swimmers, or a great parent, or something. Okay, or a great entrepreneur. I don't have the ability to be a great salesman or an entrepreneur. That's not my thing. I don't like any of that stuff, and I think it's terrible. So that's not my potential. I have a better potential at learning Aristotle than something like that. So we seem to, especially in an American culture, this is an individualist culture, and there are other cultures in the world. Asian cultures tend to be much more collectivist. The Hispanic culture, all the older cultures are more collectivist. Hispanic culture is much more collectivist. We have this idea in the United States that I'm an individual, and I'm special, and I'm unique, and, it only matters what I want and what I should do, and pursuing my goals, and damn anybody else and what they think I should be doing. Okay, fine, but that's an individualist perspective. Well, the Greek culture is an older culture, and they don't have that kind of attitude. That's a much newer attitude among the human race. The individualist attitude. The Greeks were collectivists, certainly, but as far as Aristotle was concerned, he was an early form of biologist. So the biology of a thing seems to dictate its arete, its potential. Human beings, black, white, male, female, it doesn't matter. What's special about us as human beings is something that transcends our race or perhaps gender, although Aristotle was a little bit of a sexist, but that's to be expected given when he was alive. Well, let's just pretend that he was fine with women being included in all of this and everything. As he saw it, arte is dictated by what is special and particular about a thing. So all human beings have the same thing that is unique to them, and that is, of course, reason. our ability to be rational. Nothing else that is alive seems to have that. Plants, bacteria, animals don't seem to be able to read Aristotle and come away with anything. By the way, nor do people with Down syndrome. And for a thinker like Aristotle, a person with Down syndrome is not a person, because he doesn't have the ability to achieve the human arete, the great human virtue, to fulfill his human potential, because in fact he doesn't have that potential. He has the same basic potential as an animal, as a cat, which is to feel pleasures and pains and to grow in body, but not in mind. And the Greeks didn't have the same understanding of compassion as part of their moral system that we do, because they weren't, in large part, in the Western world, they weren't Christian, since this is being written, 400 years before the birth of Jesus. So that's not a part of their moral system. Not that, of course, we, in a Christian nation, exhibit much compassion at all for poor people or anybody else. And you can certainly see that through our politics. But at least we pretend like we care about it. I actually think that's far worse than the Greeks, who don't even pretend. They just say, nope, we don't care about people who can't do for themselves what they need to do. If they can't do it, we don't have the resources to help them do it. So put them outside city walls, let them die. We say that we should take care of the other, and then we pass all these laws and vote all these politicians in who have no desire whatsoever to do that. Yeah, that's admirable. Yeah. So it goes. So on 51, I put the quote, and this is in that first full paragraph. A thing's characteristic traits are developed to a high degree. So, characteristic traits. So, a willow tree and an oak tree do not have the same characteristic traits, because willow trees can only flourish near water. If you actually look into the biology of a willow tree, they need to grow near water. Oak trees are different. They're part of a different ecosystem, whatever. And so, a flourishing oak tree will mean something at least slightly different than a flourishing willow tree, and it will mean something very different than a flourishing human being. So our characteristic traits are reason and moral awareness. So you'll see that the definition of flourishing of a human being for Aristotle encompasses both of those particular unique traits, reason and moral awareness. An oak tree does not have moral awareness. A cat, a gorilla, a chimpanzee, the closest thing that there might be to us, none of them have moral awareness, certainly not to the extent that we do. They don't have anything close to the same rational ability that we do. So, and for Aristotle, I mean, I'm saying that they don't have anything close. I'm making the suggestion because it's absolutely true, given empirical studies into the behavior of other animals, that they do have some degree of these abilities. We're so it's a matter of degree, not a matter of kind. So higher order animals can do what we do, but it's just to a much lesser degree. Okay, this is written 2,500 years ago, and although Aristotle was very interested in the scientific method and he was an early biologist, he still didn't recognize that there are animals that have critical thinking abilities and perhaps consciousness and other sorts of things. I don't know if I'd go so far for any other animal besides human beings. In terms of moral awareness, that's tougher, but we've certainly seen that there are a number of animals, non-human animals, we are animals too, that exhibit legitimate rationality, critical thinking. Moral awareness is separate, however, and rationality is required for moral awareness, but having rationality does not necessarily lead to having moral awareness. So that's tougher. But as Aristotle saw it, and I agree with him on this one, human beings, for the most part, minus human beings who have Down syndrome, and they don't have the ability for deep critical thinking, like I do, and minus the human beings who are sociopaths, and they have the ability for critical thinking, but they don't have the ability for moral awareness. So barring people like that, the rest of us have the ability for both of those things. And that is what makes us people. And a person, nothing is a person unless it has those two abilities. There's a difference, by the way, between human and person. Human is biological. Person is something more than that. Okay? And this, by the way, forms at least one of the bases for arguments in favor of a woman's right to choose to have an abortion. Okay? By the way, we're not going to read about abortion because I want to strangle anybody who talks about that anymore in classrooms, because everybody already has their ideas and they're not going to listen to anybody else's ideas. And it's just such a fruitless conversation. So we don't read that in my class because I'm sick of hearing about it in that regard. Now, so the next point, that which flourishes, that is, that which exhibits arte and reaches eudaimonia, is a good specimen of its kind. So this is where I put in good knife, good oak tree, good person. So we know a good oak tree, if I say, that's a really good oak tree, I mean, what I mean by that is not that it's morally good, like it's making moral choices or something. It's a very forgiving and patient oak tree. Okay, that's ridiculous. Clearly that's not what I mean. I mean that it's healthy and strong, and it does what it should be doing as an oak tree. So if it were diseased and half of its branches didn't have leaves, and you could see that the bark was brittle and there were termites, then I wouldn't call it a good oak tree. I'd call it a bad oak tree. It's a diseased oak tree or something, but it's certainly not an illustration of a good oak tree. Same thing with a good knife. When I say, oh, this is a good knife, I don't mean that it's a knife that's morally aware. It's a patient knife. It's a very generous and thoughtful knife. Not what I mean. I mean that it cuts things and it's sharp. That's what I mean by it being a good knife. It works. That is, I mean that it functions properly according to how it's supposed to function. So when I say that an oak tree is a good oak tree, it's because it functions according to how it's supposed to function. And that an oak tree is supposed to do is to grow big and go to seed, have deep roots, and have leaves, and so on and so forth. That's what it's supposed to do. It's not that it's brittle and dead, but a lot of termites can make their home in it. I guess that's nice for the termites, but that is not a good oak tree because it's dead and diseased and crumbling, but it provides homes for lots of termites. That's not what I mean when I say this is a very good oak tree. I mean that it is good insofar as it fulfills its given function. So, I mean the same thing when I say that this is a good knife. It fulfills its given function. And I mean the same thing when I say he's a good person. But when I say it in terms of a person, I mean he's a moral person. But I don't mean anything other still than he is fulfilling his function, what he's supposed to do. I still mean exactly the same thing. It's just that what a man is supposed to do is singular to humans. And what an oak tree is supposed to do is singular to oak trees. And what a knife is supposed to do is singular to knives. It's not the same thing as what a good spoon is supposed to do. A spoon, if good, does something different than a knife. But they're both good. A human, if good, does something different than the knife. But they're both good if they perform their function. So, of course, this begs the question then, what is the function of a human being? We already know what the function of the oak tree is, and what the knife is, and the spoon. So what's the function of a human being? Well, of course, it's something particular to humans, and it's not what is particular to a single person, a single man versus another man, or a man versus a woman, or a straight person versus a gay person. Aristotle doesn't care about any of that. We're all human. We all have the same special thing about us, and it is rationality and moral awareness. So we'll see that his function is in fact a combination of those two for human beings. And I put in the last bullet point in that section, human function, activity of the